We saw the same thing when we started moving to the cloud in a lot of solutions. We started moving to the internet. Historically, yes, the bubbles were big and they burst really big and they could cause some real impact in people's lives. But that early expending got us beyond where one company could imagine us could at, right? Like it was that huge industry specific push to move something forward. And that's what we're seeing in the AI right now. And so I do think we need a lot of probably spending that isn't going anywhere. What I think people have to do on the business side, though, especially business leaders, is making sure they're not spending more than they can afford to lose.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome, everyone, to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. And we are recording today on August 14th, 2024, just before everybody's running into starting off their school year. So we know a lot of school shopping is going on and other things this week. I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group, a research and advisory firm. And joining me today is my co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group. Cliff, what a week. We're running into all the September events that are coming up. So lots of tea for us to spill today, I believe. Another 10 segment part, right?
Yeah, that's right. We brewed up a big pot. It's like we're going back to school as well. I know that my sister's children are going to be out there. So shout out to Maddox and Cash. I know you probably listen to this on your way to school. That would be amazing. But yeah, we have a lot to go through from all over. A lot of interesting stories. And for those of you keeping score at home, we're talking about AI. It's going to be a big one today. But there's been a lot of news that even if you only loosely follow these stories, you may have heard a few of these. So I'm pretty excited. I don't know if you want to jump in or we want to talk about any of the other stuff we have going on first.
Well, let's talk a little bit about where everybody can catch us over the next 2 to 3 months, because you and I are getting back on the road again, and we're at the same time finishing off the big annual report that we do every year, right? So maybe just a quick reminder for everyone that we are getting ready to publish we're going to sort of do backwards the report delivery this year. So we're going to be delivering before the full report's out are what we call our voice of the customer segments. So the data that's around all the vendors and their user experience and vendor satisfaction will come out first this year, because we're going to be presenting that information at the HR Technology Conference this year. And then the full report will be available on October 31st. And I think we're probably going to do some pretty big events around that, so everyone should watch their news for it. Cliff, I don't know about you, but I've already got my Halloween costume for that event, don't you?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm excited. Going to be going as a UX versus VS chart. That's going to be the hottest one this year, I think.
There you go. But we're also going to be at a lot of events. So one of the first events I think you might be able to catch one of us at would be the Oracle Cloud World on September 9th through 11th. Cliff will be representing Sapient Insights there. He'll be showing up to gather all the news and take all the information. So if you have any specific questions for Cliff while he's there capturing information, please let us know. Also, we'll be at the HR Technology Conference, which is, oh goodness, my dates are not sitting here in front of me, Cliff. It's September 23rd this year, right?
Yeah, it's that week. I want to say it's like the 22nd to the 26th,
Okay.
With the kind of big days being the 23rd and 24th.
I was hoping you had a better
We're going to
memory.
be there the entire week. So that Monday through that Thursday evening, maybe even Friday for a few of us, we'll be there. So if you're going to be at HR Tech, you will be able to find us. We are going to be at a lot of scheduled events, but we are leaving some time to be on the expo floor as well.
Yes. And just because I had to go look over to the side here to get it, September 24th, September 25th, and September 26th. So we were close. We were in there somewhere. But there will be a lot of events you'll be catching us. So our first event that week on September 24th, which is that Tuesday when we're doing Women in HR Tech, our CEO, Terry Zipper, is going to be presenting with Danielle Bouchon, who will be talking about creating a culture of data transparency for HR. That's a really big conversation, and how it impacts things like pay equity and women in leadership. And then you can drop by my keynote mega session, which will be on Wednesday at 1 p.m. And just a shout out to everybody who pushed to have it back on the first day again. I know that was one of the conversations that we had last year. So thank you, everyone, because that's why it is moved to the first day. That's going to be the voice the customer highlights from our 27th annual HR Systems Survey. Cliff will be helping me put some of that together. So he'll be out in the audience if we have additional questions. And then we also will be signing my books and giving out some books for some exciting things that we're going to be promoting at the IREM booth, which is 5502, I think. And that will also we'll be doing our HR Huddle podcast interviews there with Terry Zipper, our CEO. And then Cliff, we just got some brand new things that we added to the list, which was kind of crazy. Cliff and I they had a spot open. They needed someone to fill something. And both Cliff and I said, hey, we've got some content that we think will be valuable. So on Thursday at 1 p.m., we are going to be doing a session called a Technology Agnostic Approach to Skills Management with Cliff and Stacey. So Cliff, this is when you and I have done, we've got some insights into what's happening in the skills management space, but we also have some fresh off the press data that we'll be able to share in that session, right?
That's exactly it. And it'll be kind of a continuation because, anyone that listens to this show, anyone that reads what we put out knows that skills management is something, especially from Stacey, that we think doesn't get enough of a light shown on it. And so we're going beyond just saying, oh, here's some stuff about skills management. We're really getting into the specifics beyond, of course, the vendors and what's new and what's involved in technology, but how you can apply these things and what you should be looking for in the future, because it's something that I think, as we start getting through the news is going to be a bit of a theme for this week is how well we've done at sort of using that data to understand the trends of what we're going to see in the future.
Yeah, it's going to be a big part of the paper this year. We're going to have a full segment on skills management, and not from the sense of, I think we've always got to be careful with the skills management conversation, because sometimes I think people put it out in the market as necessary and easy, but it's not. It is necessary and really hard. And so we're gonna give you some of the reality check around practically implementing a skills management strategy and what organizations are doing and what vendors are using and what outcomes they're getting. So I think it's going to be exciting. After HR Tech, though, we're also going to be at several events. Cliff, you and I will both be at the iSolved Connect event, October 7th through the 10th, which is just a few weeks after HR Tech. We'll also be at the Unit 4 event on November 6th through 7th, that's more of an analyst event, but they're coming. They usually do a lot of their work internationally. They are doing more work in the States, and so they're going to be bringing a group of their production team and executives over to talk to the analyst here in the United States. And then we'll be at UKG Aspire, November 12th to the 13th. And Workday Europe event this year on November 12th to 14th. So a packed calendar up through the end of at least the Thanksgiving holiday. Cliff, this is going to be a lot of running around. I'm going to ask you the one question I think everybody's mind. Will we hit the October 31st date to get the full paper out?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think we're going to have it done before, but, it's more than just the writing, as we always say, right? It's also checking, the data, double checking, adding in new things, because as we talk about on the show, new developments happen all the time. We want to make sure that's reflected. We don't just say, hey, this is what it was and just deal with it. We like to always keep updating and having everything ready. So I think for that reason, we need to be able to have those other sections. We have those voice of the customer. They're so important for anyone that's dealing directly with vendors and needs to know where it stands and what's new and who they should be watching. But those other areas are just as important. Strategy and the business of HR, for instance, implementation and change management, that tells you, okay, I have the tech. What do I do with it, right? And we get a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different styles too. If you're like, all right, I just want tons of data. Well, we've got it. But you're like, also, okay, I need someone to kind of walk me through a day in the life, give me a little more of a story, tell me how this goes through and how this might apply to my business. That's in there too. There's a reason it's, over 200 pages. And believe me, we'd make it shorter if it could be, but we want to make sure that there's something there for everybody.
Yeah, it's kind of nice. For the longest time, we always had a small team that was pulling this paper together, but it was also not as big as it has been in these last couple of years. It was a little bit smaller, probably about half of what we did in many cases, if not less. But I will have to say, I always felt like that getting it done was a heavy burden on the shoulders, right? Because there was so much that was involved in this research. And so it's nice to have a team and to have Cliff leading that team, kind of really ensuring that he's confident we're going to hit the dates. I don't have to worry about it. It just makes my heart feel really, really good, Cliff. So thank you to hear that confidence. And I know I've started to see the data, and we've already started talking about the data. So it's going to be good this year. That's all I got to say. So just
Yeah, I think so.
My 2 cents.
No, and we mentioned it on the last episode, but highest number of respondents of all time. That's a data point I'll give you right now for free. Don't have to buy the paper to know this. 3,318 respondents, just absolutely amazing. And I'm really looking forward to, we're all looking forward to sharing all of that data and insights with you all. So thank you all for, especially if you took the survey or even distribute it in any way that you were involved, all that thanks goes out to you.
Well, I know we'll be putting out, I think you're going to put a blog out this week if we can get all of our T's crossed and I's dotted, that will give a little bit more detail on some of that sort of demographic information. We do also have for distributors coming up a webinar at the end of this month on even more details on kind of what are the demographics of those who participate in the research. So that's coming up for anybody who was a distributor. But I mean, we've got so much going on. And then on top of it, we've got a full bed of content here today to talk about what's going on in the market. So Cliff, we better jump into that so that
that's right.
For everybody.
Enough about us, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's start by talking about SD Worx. And I feel like I'm going to go right back talking about us because they are in the paper. They're one of the companies that we track. And when I mentioned new things happening, they have acquired F2A from Ardian or Ardian. I'm not 100% sure on that, who was the investment house that held F2A. So, for the most part, this helps SD Worx get into the Italian market. Reading from what they're talking about, this is a big part of the geographies, but it's also some of the specific software that's needed for that geography. And just really, again, as we've talked about it numerous times, really understanding the needs of specific markets and understanding what is the best way to approach those and meet those needs in a way that works best for both companies. And I think that that's what we're seeing here. We don't know the exact dollar amount, but, as always, very interesting to see. Obviously the bigger player here is SD Worx, one we've known and watched for a very long time. But, they clearly saw that, this is an important geography and set of, specific parts of the software that they needed to be able to have in order to serve them. So pretty interesting stuff. And I always like to see those sort of things that happen within just the EU, because a lot of times it gets thought of as sort of monolithic, right? We're just like, oh, that's an EU-based company. But just like if you're a United States-based, and we always talk about, oh, California's got its own set of regulations. Remember that the EU, although they have certain rules, it does not mean that it's all the same. There is still a lot of geographical dissimilarities and changes and unique little elements that can go within municipalities, within, provinces, within countries and counties, and all of the little parts, even within countries within the EU. So, and that's proven out by the fact that this was the move that SD Worx wanted to play.
Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, I think we're hearing more and more about the idea of globalization of payroll, getting all of your data at least in one view, in one format. The payroll data is becoming more and more important to strategic decision making inside the organization. And so I'm not surprised to see this. I do think that, there's a lot of conversation to be had about what is a true global payroll versus what is sort of a global payroll aggregator versus what is an organization that has sort of pulled together a coalition of payrolls that are, and the services are behind them, which is really important, and the support behind them. I think it was one of the things they called out in this press release was more than 1,200 experts supporting 6,000 customers right now across the two business units. So that shows how big and how much effort it takes to do payroll in a really good way. You just don't need as many resources probably for some of the other SaaS-based solutions in the market that are running for various organizations. But payroll is an area you have to have your compliance experts embedded into the work that you're doing. So I was glad to see this. I think we're going to see more from SD Worx. I know we've had a couple of friends of ours like Luke who have gone over to SD Worx. So I'm waiting to see how they expand what they're doing here. Yeah.
Absolutely. And not a acquisition, but a partnership, but also in that era of sort of expanding the offering. Beeline and Upwork announced a strategic partnership. So Upwork, I'm always curious which people might know better, but Upwork is definitely the organization I knew better. That's a big collection of what we just say contingent workers, workers all different types, a lot of freelance workers, and Beeline primarily known for their vendor management system, their VMS, right? So by doing this, you've got that entire network of Upwork professionals that can now be surfaced within the Beeline platform, right? Really giving you kind of even more of an all-in-one shop for anyone that deals with a large amount of contingent workers that's looking for, a sort of one spot where they're like find the workers, pay the workers, stay in compliance with all the workers, depending on your area. So again, you really see again, what they saw in the market is clearly a need that needed to be addressed, which is kind of, I think, the best kind of moves to make rather than just simply saying, okay, we're buying this or partnering just to partner, right? This is everyone says strategic partnership, but I think that this really kind of really makes the case. It's easy to understand how both of these organizations saw the fit.
Yeah, this one is interesting. I like Beeline. So I don't know if it's been about maybe 2 years now back, Beeline picked up what was Utmost, which was another sort of smaller competitor that came out of the contingent workforce space, whose CEO now is over at Dan, who's now over at SAP SuccessFactors as the president of the SuccessFactors application area, right? So kind of small world how all of this is kind of working out, because SAP SuccessFactors has that very strong field glass product, which is in this space, right? I think you're just seeing more and more the contingent workforce become an HR conversation. It's not just a vendor management conversation. And that gig worker role, which is a little different than pure sort of contract relationships, which might be like an RPO or something that, or an outplacement service that you might have had, right? And so we're seeing all of these kind of merging and working together. This is in direct competition to something like what we've seen happen over at Workday with Vimly, right? So I think we're going to see more and more of this happen. I think Beeline is one of those companies that probably was on a spreadsheet somewhere. You didn't quite know all the things that they were doing. Right. You're going to see them a lot more as they continue to expand what they're doing in this space, right?
Absolutely. And I loved that you have such a good institutional knowledge of where people were and where they went. It really feels like, this is really the spilling the tea sessions.
It gets to be a really small world really quick in some ways, right?
That's right. But, speaking of, how big it is in terms of just growth and size, Employ made the Inc. 5,000 fast growing companies. Now, Employ, you'd be thinking, oh, fast growing companies, haven't they been around? It's probably because you're thinking of all the companies that fall under their umbrella. So, that's Jazz HR, Lever, JobVite, Next Thing RPO. So that's all under that. So that sort of consolidated group is why they'd be considered, a fast growing company. And and it's not one of those things like, we made the top 5,000. It wasn't like even closer. And I think it was 2862, number 2862. So they just blew, past a whole lot of other companies and obviously really making a move. And, those represent a lot of companies, I'd say more or less in the, obviously the RPO space, we can see that, but, in the sort of early part of the talent life cycle, but, a whole lot of different sort of organizations and clearly all under the same stewardship. So just, again, I like to see the sort of growth. That's one of the things that we talk about here. We're not curating. We're not saying, we've mentioned before when there's been job cuts. It's just really the fact is that we're seeing a lot of growth in this area. And we're going to talk a little more about that later, about where we're seeing some growth, because there is some dire news, but there's also a lot of strength in this market as well.
Yeah. And I think it goes to also share, and Cliff, you and I have talked quite a bit about this, about, in some cases, brands become really strong under the point solutions. And in some cases, you'll see point solutions get bought up by other HR platforms that become part of the HR platform. In some cases, you see something like this where they're just, and what we saw with organizations like Indeed, right, where they just continue to buy more of some of the same, right, of what they already have. So they just expand their market share, have different options for different people. And applicant tracking business tools, I think, are one of those where it's sort of hard to create something with a lot of breadth and depth that meets all the needs of all the different sort of organizations. And so we do see that this is one where oftentimes it gets sort of sucked into a different conglomeration of things, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. There's, as you were saying earlier about skills management, it's it seems like it's just one simple thing, but really there's a whole lot to it. So, and then I think that just proves it, right? Because there's clearly a market need for it. And more growth, we're seeing expansion within organizations adding to it. Paychex has announced an employee engagement solution. And, I'd have to see this sort of coloring book chart to see if there's anything left that Paychex doesn't have a solution for, but they're going to have Paychex Flex Engage, and this is going to be, everything you might think of within an engagement platform. And honestly, I think a little bit more too, because we're seeing, beyond just sort of communication, we're seeing some of the recognition space and some of the other things, performance reviews and rewards that are all within this pretty broad offering, extension of what they have available. So pretty neat. I know that I'm sure we'll get a chance to dive in a little deeper to it, but just so that you listeners know, we often do know about these things, but we're under an NDA and can't say things too. So sometimes it's just like relief. Yes, here we go. We're telling you, but we always tell you as soon as we're legally allowed to. But really neat to see, just because for what I was saying at the beginning, it's kind of cool to see a true full suite, something that we've talked about for a long time.
Yeah. And I think it's important to always kind of remind people of the size of some of these organizations, right? So Paychex has over 745,000 customers, right? Like the only one that kind of comes close, and now they have a lot of SMBs. And so they don't serve the same number if you look at total number of sort of employees individually, right? As the larger firms. But, really the two names you tend to always hear together is Paychex and ADP. They just have such a big view of particularly of the SMB market, right? So they have about 16,000 employees now at Paychex that are committed to serving those organizations. And it's a massive amount of investment in understanding sort of what are the needs of the SMB market for many of them, right? I do think, we've seen Paychex, they've had solutions in place for a while around performance and compensation. I think a bit of this is they've put some updated new wrappers around some of what they already had, right? Mm-hmm. And they've created more of a dashboard feel with this engagement solution, right? To something that they already had sort of in place in their Flex product, which from what I understand and our conversations with them, Flex is kind of the primary they're using across all the primary solutions except for the very smallest, right? And I think this is, one of the things that you and I have said for a while is that the HR technology space is no longer, there's not a lot to innovate left, right? It is a highly commoditized market. So a lot of the conversation now comes down to value, full suite conversations, integration of data, integration with the partners who will have a few of those small innovations that you absolutely will always need in this market, right? It just shifts the buying conversation a little bit, I think, for a lot of organizations, particularly SMB and mid-market, who are trying to simplify their worlds more, right? So I'm excited to see Paychex continue to sort of expand what they're offering in a more sort of holistic way. I believe we're going to be at HR Tech doing one more of their, every year at HR Tech, we do a podcast with them where they kind of present that to their customers, right? So I'm sure we'll get into some of this topic at the HR Tech conference here in a few weeks. But I just think this is a bigger conversation about what's happening to all the pays, if you want to call them, right?
Yes.
The pay comes, the pay cores, the pay velocities, the pay, right? They're all competing in a very tight market. And I think you do have to make some noise about when you're starting to tie some of these things together in a better way, right?
Yeah. And I think that term you use, simplification, is key, because that's what they're looking for. Another thing that's interesting, because you were mentioning that you don't sort of realize just how many maybe employees, or even in this case, we're going to talk about just candidates, are reached out by or touched by, in an HR safe way, by some of these organizations. This was a report that came out from iCIMS that showed that there's actually quite a bit of demand and supply, people taking jobs, especially in the tech market. Despite what you might have heard about, as they call it, economic uncertainty, they're seeing that there is actually increases, not just, again, in applications, but in jobs that are being hired. And you start to really think about these numbers when we're talking about the really big applicant tracking systems and TA companies like iCIMS, they're looking at 200 million applicants with 5.5 million hires annually. So, you start to really think about that's a very large data set. That's larger even than ours. So it's like when ADP kind of gives a jobs report, it has a little more weight because it's not, based on speculation. It's saying, hey, this is what we're seeing. So I always like to see that some of these organizations using their data in a broader market and giving a sense of what's really happening out there, especially considering that, there is a lot of uncertainty in the job market, and no one's saying that there isn't, but there is also still a heavy demand and supply for these jobs.
Yeah, and I think her exact, Ria Moss, who is their global head of workforce and customer insights at iCIMS, exact quote was that while the focus on the labor market has heated up, we've seen a lot in the last month on, the stock market, which I think we're going to get into in just the next conversation, had a bit of a crash because of some news on, at least in the United States, on labor stats, along with the AI conversation. Her comment was that the labor market itself has not melted away.
Yes, great quote.
Yeah, our data, I think, is probably going to come pretty close to this as well. That there's turbulence. There's been a lot of hold and wait in our space. And because there's been a lot of hold and wait, I think you're seeing actually more activity because now people are like, okay, I have a direction. I have a next step that I'm taking. And it's probably not going to show up for maybe another 2 to 3 months. But I wouldn't count out sort of an economic sort of increase in certain areas and certain industries. And that's really what I think is going to be happening is you're going to really want to double down on what industries are going to be growing. And something like healthcare, no matter what's happening in the market, we're going to see growth in the healthcare space, right? So, yeah.
And I wouldn't count out anything that you ever said because I think you're something like 5,900 for 5,900 on predictions. So whatever Stacey says, take it to the bank. But as I said, it's not all great news. But, speaking of times, we've talked about this and been right. And I'm usually a little more, or I know you're very shy about this. I'm trying not to be as much. But one of the big stories that made national news, and you might have heard this even to our global listeners, is that they found a sort of devaluation, a drop in the total value in the AI market by, they're saying 2 trillion. I actually think it's slightly, you could think of that because they're saying 2.6 trillion. But remember, the way they're looking at that is they're taking some of the biggest companies that are considered AI companies, but think Google and Meta, they have more than that, right? So yes, a lot of that drop was due to lower earnings than expected on AI products. And, that sort of snowballs, right? Once, that's just how the investment markets work. What does that mean? Well, that is something we have mentioned, that this is a for-profit set of businesses, right? They're not making AI to sort of advance. This isn't through the government. They're looking for ways which can be monetized. And as we've talked about before in earlier news stories, a lot of them are losing money. They're putting these AI products out for free or for cheaper than it costs them to develop and run them with the resources required. They're resource-intensive things. For you as listeners, I would just say that doesn't mean, okay, AI was a bubble that's burst and it's gone now. It just means that, as we've always said, you need to be thoughtful about what is your use of AI and how is it actually more efficient? Is this something that is making your life better, and what is that worth? Is it worth the amount that is going to cost? Because even if it's free now, it is not always going to be. Is this a service or is this a process that you absolutely cannot do without AI? Then you might want to be a little more nervous about how you have your organization structured. But this is kind of the proof of what we've been talking about for a long time, is that for all the hype, that is still a costly venture, a costly technology. And, it may not be going away, but you may see a slowing down of putting AI into everything. is my thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think again, this, they, after the likes, as they say, of Google and Meta revealed that their spending on AI technology far exceeded Wall Street's expectations. I think you and I most people probably could have told them that was what was happening. That I love, the one quote was, "This is amazing about face. Like, we've crashed into a brick wall." And I'm like, well, I think only the people who weren't really watching what was going on crashed into a brick wall. we all knew, and this is again another situation where there's no easy button. Getting this right costs money. And the reason I have to keep reiterating, the reason Google and those guys didn't come out earlier with their generative AI tools or their versions of generative AI tools before what we saw with ChatGPT is because they knew there were problems with those, that they weren't going to be perfect. I think what we're seeing in the market right now is organizations like ChatGPT and others are saying, okay, we know we're going to learn together. And they've taken that risk. But that also means that you're taking that additional budget across the market, right? More people are investing in that concept instead of a small research and development group, right? And maybe that's the way to do it. Maybe that's the way we've all got to sort of be able to pay into this to actually see the kind of movement that we're expecting to see. So I think caution isn't the right word that I want to use here. I think it is truly more a matter of practicality. Really thinking about this. We saw the same thing when we started moving to the cloud in a lot of solutions. We started moving to the internet. Historically, yes, the bubbles were big and they burst really big and they could cause some real impact in people's lives. But that early expending got us beyond where one company could imagine us could at, right? Like it was that huge industry specific push to move something forward. And that's what we're seeing in the AI right now. And so I do think we need a lot of probably spending that isn't going anywhere. What I think people have to do on the business side, though, especially business leaders, is making sure they're not spending more than they can afford to lose. That's what it comes down to. Like any other risk and gamble that you're making in the market, that's the conversation, because it's going to take more than we expect to get to where the day of the robot coming to our door and fulfilling our services and answering all of our questions without having to worry that it's going to tell us to glue pizza or, glue things onto our pizza. But once it's there, and I think you've mentioned this several times, Cliff, this is the worst AI you'll ever get, right?
Right.
I'm not completely in agreement with all that because I have seen it go backwards in math since it's been released because it's picking up some bad math issues, right? But I do think that, everybody is trying to figure out how we get to that next step where AI is making our worlds easier and not just telling us pretty poems, right? And we're getting there. We're seeing that. We see that in our data. We will have specific examples of how AI is helping organizations, but we're also going to show in our data that it's not a easy button, not a flip the switch and done type of thing, right?
That's right. And, part of that comes from our ability to sort of oversee it, right? Which I think kind of leads us into a really great post. This was from Sam Turnpenny talking about the EU AI Act. And as we've often seen in the past, generally, not always, but most of the time, anything in sort of the HR or people regulation or even tech regulation, let's just say regulation, tends to start in the EU and then is a sort of version of that, a sort of watered down version, or at least some guidance from that comes to the United States. But due to the globalization that Stacey mentioned earlier, you really still have to be aware of it and probably you need to adhere to it. And he talks about, there's still, it doesn't, it's not completely in effect, but some of the early stuff that's going to be in the next 6 months have to do with places where you're just not allowed to use AI. So things like you can't use it for determining emotion, right? You can say, this person was angry in this meeting, therefore they're fired or anything like that. That sort of thing. Determining physical characteristics of a person is out. The sort of things that I would consider, that makes sense. But then again, if you don't regulate it, people will take advantage of it. It's just the sad truth. Because, they'll do it under the auspices of, no, this is helping people. This is, in a way helpful. So if you don't regulate it, those things will happen. But it's an interesting and good set of guidelines that helps from that sort of other side of that AI perspective, right? Some of it is what we're guiding and what we're asking you to do, what we're pushing. And this is sort of the pushing from the other direction, right? Of saying, no, you need to go this direction so you don't hit that wall, right? You need to go over there while we're trying to go faster. Yeah. No, maybe a little to the left and slow down. So, just pretty interesting stuff. As always, we'll have a link to his post and these notes. Anything of the major stories will be in the show notes, both on YouTube and on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and I just want to call out the one thing that they note that employers using AI to source, screen, and select candidates will have to comply within 2 years a fundamental rights impact assessment, which I think everybody should be aware of what that is. Appointing a suitably trained and qualified person to oversee these AI systems. We've been talking about a chief AI ethics and responsibility role for a while. Informing people when they are interacting with an AI tool. That's a fairly easy, somewhat easy thing, not all the time. Ensuring the data is input into the AI tool is relevant and representative. So not inputting extra stuff, which is a great thing. AI loves to bring in a bunch of data so that it can kind of decide what's important. So you might have to assess some of your tools for that. And following instructions to keep certain records, report certain incidents and more, so kind of following what happens with that AI along the way. Those are things you're going to have to do, right? So no matter where you're at, you've got to follow some of this stuff. The big thing is to understand how big these fines can reach. And I think that was the one that we've been talking to quite a few organizations recently about their compliance needs. And in this particular one, the highest fines can reach up to 35 million, I think that's euros, right? Or 7% of company-wide worldwide turnover percent-wise, right? That can be massive for a large organization, especially a global organization, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. And sort of, if we can wrap it up, I'd like to talk about one. You sent this to me, and I found it fascinating because it's talking about an organization, Scotiabank specifically, so, EU, and saying, how do we sort of start using and creating an ethical AI culture? And some of these seem more like practical, but I think that was a term that you used earlier as well. How do we get it more accurate, but serving the purpose of what is it we're trying to do? So using AI to train AI, taking people's responses and putting that back into the model rather than saying, okay, what's wrong this amount of time, but how do we improve that? And thinking about how people want to interact. If you're dealing with a chatbot, you don't want to say the exact same thing to chatbot, just as you wouldn't with a human, right? It's what did I just waste my time? So what do? You see a sort of summary of what was discussed, and that is what the next chatbot goes on. They see really nice results. They saw, over the last 2 years, the accuracy level's gone up from 35% to 90%, which is great. Although that first number, 35%, tells me that tells you where the AI is for a lot of these organizations. But he says it's hopefully getting better all the time. But, just in general, I do like the focus was on how is this affecting people? That was the final goal rather than just how is this affecting efficiency. I like
Yeah. And Scotiabank, first off, they're out of Toronto, Canada, not
Toronto, Nova Scotia.
Yes. But I used to work with
as an American, anything north of me is just
not to call you on the ground. I just want to make sure.
No, you got me.
Yeah. But I used to work quite a bit with Scotiabank back in the early days. I worked a lot with them on the learning and development world that they were in, right? And they were one of the most progressive L&D functions that I had worked with in quite some time. But technology was always a challenge, right? For every organization, it's a challenge. And I think, to me, this really highlights a really well thought out partnership between kind of the idea of what we're presenting to our customers and to our clients and what we're doing and to help our internal employees and bringing AI to that conversation, right? They won that Data IQ Innovation Award for the work they were doing. This is not HR specific, but it has an impact on the HR. It has an impact on employees, right? And so I just really liked that this was very focused on ethical conversations, very focused on what they could and couldn't share, and definitely was about meeting the employee and the customer where they were at in that conversation and making sure that the two were getting the best of what this could offer versus it was just kind of getting people to a first level and that was good enough. We're going to get them off our plate now, right? They really were thinking about how do I get them through the entire cycle that I need them to get through. So I thought this was good. And I think it was just a good example of how people should think about their strategic approaches to AI versus just a one-time or an embedded element of things, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, I'll put the link in because that was what was interesting to me too, because I think in theory, we say, you need to take an ethical approach. This was great to see how that is applied and what we mean by that and how it can really have real results that aren't just, okay, we need to be more ethical. What does that mean? But it also helps the business. This is a win-win. And it was really wonderful to see. So.
And I think we're kind of wrapped up. I know there was one additional conversation here about pre-existing beliefs about AI at work. This was a Forbes article, but I think they took this off of some of the Microsoft presentations and materials that we've seen recently as well, right? But they were really talking about how 41% of employees were showing skepticism about using AI at work this summer. Oh no, this was Asana's Work Innovation Lab. That's what it was. It wasn't Microsoft. So this was coming out of Asana, which we use. So just very
transparent. Yep.
Transparent. Yeah, it is. That is a solution we use quite effectively to run our projects internally. So I thought this was interesting because they were pulling this from data they had captured from their customers, I think, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it gets to something that I think we started talking about, if not last episode, the one before, which is this idea of trust, which is something that comes up a lot when you're talking about things like data governance or just any use of data. But AI has that same concepts of the times, how just human trust works. And understanding that, if you lose it, it's gone for a long time. And how do you build trust? And how does the sort of psychology of people work with something like AI when trust can be a big issue, and how they sort of got through those ideas of, skepticism or outright resistance or just needing to adapt, which is a form of trust, right? Being willing to change. So I found it fascinating because, it's a tool that I can understand what it's like to use it day after day and where those sort of functions come in and how you can think about people, just like in the last story, how you can think about people using it and what are the practical effects that this is going to have by using this technology, and what can you do to improve those effects on people.
Yeah, if you're someone trying to build more trust in AI in your organization, which I know some organizations are, this I think this is a good article to read, and definitely an interesting study. I would go down to the study, not so much to the article. Articles are oftentimes very light on this kind of topic, but I would go down to the study and the conversation that Rebecca Hines, who's head of Asana's Work Innovations Lab, is having. And maybe we can even reach out. It's a good idea. Maybe we can talk and see if they'd be willing to come on the show, on our partner show on the HR Huddle, because I think this is a conversation that everyone should have, right? Which is, we want to understand what it takes to help employees and human beings change. When we stop thinking about what they need to make them feel comfortable with change, and we just start shoving things in, or we don't give them enough value or purpose in making that change, then the work environment is not only are they not doing what we need them to do, or they're only getting around it. It just reminds me, for those who maybe are a little bit older and has ever gotten a chance to see the movie Office Space, not the TV series, and the TCP reports, if anybody remembers those. That is what it feels like when you're pushing it without giving them a why and helping them understand the value proposition. So my 2 cents on that one. All right. And I've showed my age. Cliff, I think we need to wrap up for the day because we're already over again.
Yeah, no, I'm just imagining everyone smashing the AI machines with the hammer in the field now.
I know. Yes.
Some ghetto voice playing in the background.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Now everybody, if you haven't seen that show, it is a cult classic. It's really, really good. You got to go look it up. It's a great movie from it was early 90s, right? Or was it 2000? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. All right. As we wrap today on all of our great conversations on AI and what's happening in the market, just a reminder, the full annual HR System Survey white paper will be available on October 31st for the update. But if you buy it now, this is just a hint to everybody. If you buy it now, you'll get last year's and next year's. So a great opportunity to do that. We once again have covered more than 200 HR vendors this year in our research and in our data. And again, lots and lots of participants in the survey this year. Also, please go to the website to sign up for the newsletter to get ongoing updates on our research launches, where we'll be speaking and visiting if we couldn't catch it all in our podcast, and then details on when we're launching the actual research itself. Be sure to listen to our sister HR Huddle podcast, HR We Have a Problem, hosted by our CEO, Terry Zipper. And if you like these podcasts, and if they're adding value to your day, please support them by hitting like and subscribe. It makes all the difference to us. We love it when you tell us about hearing about the podcast. So that just know that that's just kind of personal kudos for me and Cliff. So don't stop doing that either. To stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and to get all the behind the scenes content, you can follow us at Sapient Insights on LinkedIn, X, and Instagram, and Facebook. I think we're on now too. And thanks, Cliff, for pulling all this together as usual. We really appreciate it. Also, thanks to our Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcast, run by their amazing founder, Kelly, and our marketing team, Summer Eleno, and all of the team that supports her for making sure all of these things get out on a daily basis and to your hands in a timely manner. Thanks to our listener community. We couldn't do this without you. You are what make this a valuable conversation for us. And that's it this week for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to get the engines running this week. We're really excited. The next couple of weeks, you're going to hear more and more coming out about the research. So be sure to keep tuning in. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another pot of boiling hot HR Tech updates and insights, and maybe some early sneak peeks at what's in the report this year. So thanks, everyone. Bye.